nirudhyamānasyotpattir na bhāvasyopapadyate yascha nirudhyamānastu sa bhāvo nopapadyate.
Nirudhyamānasyotpattir na bhāvasyopapadyate yascha nirudhyamānastu sa bhāvo nopapadyate. MMK chapter 7 verse 21. Springing up is impossible for a thing now being suppressed. But what is not now being suppressed cannot be a thing. So, as usual, in this chapter hitherto, if you don't understand what this verse is about on the basis of daily sitting meditation practice, you're liable to think it's still on about ontology, how things come into existence or cease. Utpadastiti banga, how the moment arises, has a duration or stasis, and then cessation. Cessation is banga, breaking up, or nirodha, destruction, dissolution. So, having spent 20 verses thinking about utpada, arising, and eventually talking, instead of using the word utpada, using the word utpati, flying up, springing up, as in this verse. He's now connecting utpati with nirodha. So the contrast there is utpati means, the prefix ut means up, and the ni of nirodha means back and down. So it's like flying up, springing up, or being held down, being held back and down. So that's the first meaning of nirodha, is like stopping, being blocked, being obstructed, being held back, being held down. The difficulty is that with nirodha, he's alluding to the third noble truth, in which case the meaning isn't to suppress pain, it's to like cut out the it's to cut the chain of links in the dependent arising of suffering. So tasya nirodhena, by the cessation of each by the cessation of this one and that one, that is like ignorance, samskaras, divided consciousness, psychophysicality, etc., etc. So as a third noble truth, nirodha means cessation or inhibition, if you use an Alexander word. And of course, inhibition, Freud used inhibition in the sense of suppression, but in Alexander work, inhibition is like the third noble truth. It's getting to the root of the problem and cutting out the problem at the root. So, because the Sanskrit word nirodha has so many possibilities, you're always going to miss out on some kind of illusion. So I've translated here nirudhyamānasya as now being suppressed. So it's genitive. So bhāvasya is of a thing, and nirudhyamānasya is genitive, agreeing with bhāvasya. And so nirudhyamāna, the now being suppressed, the now being ceased, is like gamyamana in chapter 2, or apashyamana in chapter 3, I think. And we've had utpadyamana in this chapter, the now being born. So it's passive present participle, and it suggests something happening now. So a thing now being suppressed, nirudhyamānasya bhāvasya. So both those words, you see, bhava could be a thing, in the sense that bhava means existence. Bhava with a long ba. With a short I, bhava means continuation or becoming, as I think it's the 10th link in the chain of the dependent arising of suffering. But bhava with a long ba is it means existence, hence existent thing, or it means being, so it means a living being. So you could translate springing up is impossible for a living being now being suppressed, or for a living thing now being suppressed. So again, the ambiguity of Sanskrit words means you're always liable to be the enemy of the truth as a translator. Here's a footnote I wrote 2 years ago on utpat and nirud. Ostensibly, utpat and nirud are mutually exclusive opposites. Utpati means arising, flying up, birth, production. Nirodha means suppression, holding back, holding down, death, destruction, cessation. So the ostensible meaning is that a thing like a flower that is being suppressed, or a mirror that is being destroyed, cannot arise or be produced. But the hidden meaning, which is picked up in the second line, is that what is impossible is for a flower or a mirror to exist non-emptily as a thing, bhāva, unto itself. So, to illustrate what I'm saying there, so you've got the translation of Siddharisa and Katsura, which is quite a reasonable literal translation. It cannot hold that an entity that is undergoing cessation is originating. That's like a truism, isn't it? It cannot hold that an entity, bhava, that is undergoing cessation, nirudhyamāna, is originating. But it also does not hold that there is an entity that does not undergo cessation. So they're trying to understand it, again, at the level of ontology. But what this verse is really about, I think, what it's really inviting us to explore is empty happenings in the empty happening, which is sitting meditation. An empty happening being something which neither exists nor does not exist. So springing up is impossible for a thing now being suppressed. But what is not now being suppressed, that is an empty happening, cannot be a thing. So if you read the verse like that, it relates to how we go wrong in sitting meditation, really. Because we go wrong by pursuing things as if they were things, and by suppressing things as if they were things. So the best example is probably you pursuit of enlightenment that you've conceived of as a thing, or equally pursuit of right posture, which in your little brain you've identified with enlightenment. And for the sake of the pursuit of that thing, you suppress what you perceive as troublesome things like sexual desire or resentment. So there's where we go wrong, with our non-empty conceptions of things to be pursued and things to be suppressed. So because we've spent many years engaging in that kind of stupidity, there's plenty to explore in what Nāgārjuna is saying here. Nirudhyamānasyotpattir bhāvasyopapadyate. Springing up, utpatihi, that's nominative singular feminine, is impossible. Na upapadyate. For a thing, bhāvasya, so that's genitive singular, of a thing or for a thing, now being suppressed. Nirudhyamānasya. So that's truism. Springing up is impossible for a thing now being suppressed, or for a living being that's now being suppressed by itself. Could mean that. Springing up is impossible for a silly beggar who is suppressing himself. Unless the springing up is a kind of an explosion, like a rubber ball that's been held under the water, and then it kind of spectacularly explodes into the air. But what is not now being suppressed cannot be a thing. So, but is tu. What is not now being suppressed, yas cānirudhyamānas. So, yaha, nominative singular masculine, means what or whatever. Then cha means and. I've taken that with two. So again, so cha, two, but. A is negative. So cha plus cānirudhyamāna. Cānirudhyamāna. So nirudhyamāna now being suppressed. Cānirudhyamāna not now being suppressed. So yas cānirudhyamānas tu. But what is now not being suppressed. Or but what is now beyond being suppressed. So has always got those two possibilities. Sort of negation or transcendence. That's the same in Shobogenzo. You have the Chinese character fu, like you'd say in Chinese, cānirudhyamānasyotpattir would be fumetsu, for sure. Usually in Chinese you say fu sure, fumetsu. So not birth, not death. Fu sure, fumetsu. But I usually translate that in Shobogenzo, beyond birth, beyond death. So it's in Sanskrit, the negative prefix a means non, not, or beyond. So if we say what is not now being suppressed, that could be, it could be an idea. It could be an idea to criticise Nishijima Sensei. That's always my idea, you know. For whatever reason, that idea is there. And sometimes I don't suppress it and it expresses itself. And sometimes I do suppress it, so I keep tight-lipped, or then sometimes it explodes out. So that's the kind of a deluded attempt to suppress something which you conceive as a problematic thing. But again, the thing that's not now being suppressed could be me as a living being. But in that case, if it's me as a living being, it's not bhāva in the sense of an existent thing. See, that's what it means, I think. That's one of the things it could mean anyway. So, but, to, what, yas, yaha, is not now being suppressed, cānirudhyamāna, is impossible, nopapadyate, for that, sa, bhāvo, bhavaha, to be a thing. So literally, but to whatever, yaha, is not now being suppressed, cānirudhyamānaha, that, sa, is not possible, nopapadyate, bhavaha, a thing, to be a thing, being a thing. But simply, but what is not now being suppressed cannot be a thing. So I would submit that the verses I've translated there has got more immediate meaning for a Zazen practitioner. Springing up is impossible for a thing now being suppressed. But what is not now being suppressed cannot be a thing. So, as usual, I recite these verses before going to sleep, or sometimes in my sleep, and they kind of they get tangled up with whatever I've been thinking or discussing the previous day. So yesterday I was talking about my uncle Eugene, sort of the Buddha of Ebbw Vale, you know, Mr. Wisdom. He was the guy my father used to take me to go and watch Wales play rugby of a weekend. And we would watch Wales on the Saturday, and then on the Sunday, my father and grandfather would be usually a bit worse for the wear, having drunk a lot of beer the night before. We would go and have a cup of tea with Uncle Eugene and Lady Ada in their posh house. And not only my job, really, but everybody's job was to sit there and keep quiet. It was usually me and my dad. Sometimes the grandfather would come as well, but basically Uncle Eugene was holding court. He kind of sit there Buddha-like in his armchair with his sort of talking from his hara, like the Japanese do, and he would kind of hold forth, and people's job was just to listen, really. So I'm always wondering who I'm more like. My great uncle Eugene, who in some ways I aspired to be, an important bigwig, and my mother's grandfather, Bill Howarth. So I dug out yesterday an account of Bill Howarth's life from a little pamphlet called Early Years in Blackburn and Darwin by Cynthia Cross. That's my mother, née Jordan, the name of her father who ran off. So she was brought up largely by her grandfather, Bill Howarth, and she wrote about him. Before I read that, though, I said yesterday that I would read the part in Soundarananda. See, the sun is shining fortuitously on the open page. This is from the end of chapter 14. So chapter 14 is titled Adi Prasthanaha, so stepping into action, or first steps. And so this isn't really describing the ultimate state of Buddha necessarily. It's describing, it's pointing Nanda in the direction of going off to work on himself in solitude. But the point is, the praise of not being a bigwig, but of being somewhere quiet where nobody's around. So, one who eats anything at any place and wears any clothes, who dwells in enjoyment of his own being and loves to be anywhere without people. He is to be known as a success, a knower of the taste of peace and ease, whose mind is made up. He avoids involvement with others like a thorn. Well, that could hardly be more different from Uncle Eugene, who was such a gregarious character, who said in the article he loved people. He wanted to be a politician. If in a world that delights in duality and is at heart distracted by objects, he roves in solitude, free of duality, a man of action, his heart at peace, then he drinks the essence of wisdom, as if it were the deathless nectar, and his heart is filled. Separately he sorrows for the clinging, object-needy world. If he constantly abides as a unity in an empty abode, if he is no fonder of arisings of affliction than he is of enemies, and if, going rejoicing in the self, he drinks the water of joy, then greater than dominion over 30 gods is the happiness he enjoys. So you can see the Buddha that's the Buddha telling Nanda to go and live in a solitary place. At least I think that's the Buddha. Maybe it's Asvaghosha. But the point is, what's being praised is not the wisdom of Uncle Eugene, who sits there knowing it all. It's the wisdom that's drunk. The essence of wisdom is drunk by someone who roves in solitude. Okay, and that kind of person was Bill Howarth. So this is my mother's description of Bill Howarth. Bill worked at the Walpamore Paint Manufacturing Company in Darwin as a labourer. He wore clogs for work. He wore clogs for work for much of his life. He was slightly built, thin, quiet, patient, kindly, very hard-working, and rather under his wife's thumb. He had a lovely sense of humour and a twinkle in his eye. Bill was an avid reader and used to learn poems, recitations he called them. The library was a place he visited every Saturday. On a Sunday morning, he liked to go for a long country walk around Tockholes. I often accompanied him on both weekend outings. He enjoyed a pint of beer at the Anchor pub across from his house, and a pipe full of cheap, strong tobacco. Grandpa Howarth was always hard of hearing. He told a tale of himself at school when the teacher sent him to buy a penny cane with which to punish some unfortunate. He thought she said a penny cake, and he returned with that. She told him he had better eat it. I find it unutterably sad that after a long, hard life, lived with sensitivity, understanding, forbearance, and good humour, my Grandpa Howarth's whole existence should be consigned to a couple of sketchy paragraphs, as I am the only person left who remembers much about him. So it's interesting to reflect on that, because that resonates with what Master Dogen says in Shobogenzo about all the anonymous, nameless monks who lived out in the mountains and forests of ancient China, devoting their life to practicing Zazen, watching the forest go from yellow to white to fresh green, and back to red and yellow again in the autumn. So how does this verse relate to that? Well, springing up is impossible for a thing now being suppressed, but what is not now being suppressed cannot be a thing. And as I said before, when we're not enlightened, when we're clearly not enlightened, we conceive as enlightenment or other things. We conceive as enlightenment as a thing, or right posture as a thing, or a definitive translation of Shobogenzo as a thing. And we make big efforts in pursuit of those things as we conceive them, ends to be gained. And in pursuit of those things, we suppress things that we think are in the way. Irritations like sexual desire, resentment, people's ignorance, bloody stupid, so and so and so and so, in my way. So this is not enlightened behaviour in pursuit of enlightenment. And if you go back to the beginning, Ya pratitya samutpadam prapanchopashamam shivam deshayamasa sambuddhas tam vande vadatam varam. So I bow to him, the best of speakers, tam vande vadatam varam, who Yaha taught deshayamasa, who the fully awakened, the fully enlightened Buddha, Ya Sambuddha, who taught deshayamasa, three things: pratitya samutpadam, dependent arising; prapanchopashamam, cessation of things to be pursued, cessation of things, cessation of spinning things into self-existence, reification, if you like. So that's, and shivam, nirvana, enlightenment. So what he taught as nirvana, as happiness, as enlightenment, was pratitya samutpada, springing up together by going back, which is prapanch upashama, the cessation of spinning things into self-existence. So the suggestion seems to be that real enlightenment, not the thing that we wrongly conceived as enlightenment, but real enlightenment is not the gaining of some kind of thing like knowledge or wisdom, but rather the cessation of that kind of thinking. But then the irony, you see, but that's one way of understanding it. But then he did call, in that dedicatory verses, he says, Ya Sambuddhas, he, the fully awakened Buddha, Sambuddha, the one who knows, So there's this, again, the middle way might be relevant. Because if I think of who is the Buddha? Uncle Eugene, the one who was who had wisdom, who really revered wisdom and spoke of wisdom as if it was anya, different from what people learn at university, for example. He knew the importance of intuitive wisdom as opposed to intellectual knowledge, and he demonstrated it. He was sat there like the little Buddha and shared his wisdom. Then on the other side, you've got Bill Howarth, wouldn't say boo to a goose. Nobody went to see him, and asked him for his opinion on things. He was just a clog-wearing labourer. But he was the listener. See, I used to go and visit my granny and grandpa Howarth, and my granny would sit me on a knee and say, he's my favourite, which my sister didn't much appreciate. But favourite and favourite. I was a favourite. She said, you've got footballers' legs, lovey. She'd rub me legs. I said, if anybody doing it, I'd chase them round the gasworks. That was it. So she was making a big fuss of me, always. But in the corner over there, not saying a word, with his big hearing aids in, was just watching from the corner quietly, was Bill Howard. So he wasn't the know-it-all. He was the explorer. He was the one who roved in solitude when he got a chance on a Sunday morning. He'd go for long walks around tockholes. So in MMK also, you've got Nāgārjuna revering the Buddha as Vadatam Varam, the best of speakers. Not only the best of listeners, which he was as well, but he was the best of speakers, the fully awakened Buddha. But also the title of every chapter is Pariksha. He's talking about exploring. And Darshanam, as we've explored already, on the surface it means to see. It means seeing, realising. But we've also asked the question whether Darshana, primarily in Nāgārjuna's teaching, might mean looking deeply into things. So a similar contrast I see between Nishijima Roshi, because when I met him, the thing I loved about him was his confidence, his assurance. He was like Uncle Eugene. He was the one who was emanating wisdom. But what I loved about him came to be the thing I hated about him, which was instead of being the explorer, he was the one who already knew. Hence his stupid words that if Alexander technique is different from Buddhism, I don't have any interest in studying it. And if it's the same as Buddhism, I don't need to study it. But yes, you did need to study it because you didn't understand Buddhism. You didn't understand the teaching of emptiness. So, I had enough of the Japanese arrogance talking about that, I worked for many years for a Japanese economist. And again, there was a contrast there because the Japanese economist was a very wise person. See, Nishijima Sensei would sit there like Uncle Eugene, coming from his centre. He'd drink his green tea. Everything was from his centre, you see. So he would give the impression of being really the boss. And, this is like this, and that is like idealism and materialism and Hegel and Marx, the kind of everything, he understood everything. I worked for this economist, and he'd be thinking out what he wanted to say as he was dictating to me these economic papers. He used to write for the International Economy, for example, these weighty publications. So my job was to dictate the dictation and go away and turn it into an article. And he'd be checking the figures, and he'd be saying GDP growth of 3% and he'd be fidgeting about and kind of looking nervous. And the thing I realised over the years is when it came to any kind of pontification about politics or economics, Nishijima Sensei would invariably be wrong. He'd be very confident and not at all in doubt or hesitant, but he'd be wrong. And the economists I worked for tended to hit the target, especially when it came to predicting the end of the Japanese bubble. But for Nishijima Sensei, the Japanese bubble was just a natural, Japan as number one was quite a natural thing for, the best, most civilized nation in the world. So that was one kind of contrast. But then another kind of contrast, which I've mentioned before, is when I came to the Alexander technique, I mentioned before, Patrick MacDonald famously said, finality for me is not in sight. And that is generally the ethic of Alexander work. Alexander himself said, we've barely scratched the surface of the egg. He realised that we were onto something we can't get our heads around, unfathomably deep. And that was brought home to me very memorably when my Alexander head of training, Ray Evans, was dying of cancer at the age of 78. And he was vomiting because of the drugs he was taking, or because of the cancer, I don't know, I think it was the drugs. But his wife told me that by his bedside, he'd got his anatomy books open. He was exploring, he was trying to understand the vomit reflex right until the end, you see. He had that mind. Before he came to the Alexander work, he was an engineer. So he was interested in how things work, So that's the explorer. That isn't the one who knows it all already. So thinking about those two things, you see, we've got the phrase in, I think it's chapter 3, Drashtavyopashamam Shivam. Was it chapter 5, maybe, the end of one of the earlier chapters? Drashtavyopashamam Shivam. Shivam, happiness, nirvana, enlightenment, as the ending of drashtavya, objects to be seen or objects to be realised. So that's suggesting enlightenment is not an object to be realised, it's the ending of objects to be realised. So how does that ending take place then? What is the ending of objects to be realised? Is that enlightenment in the sense of becoming the one who knows, the fully awakened Sambuddha? Or is it means you become a genuine explorer? And so the answers to those questions generally turns out in the teaching of Master Dogen and Nāgārjuna to be no. It's not that and it's not that. Because probably both those questions are based on non-empty conceptions. So if enlightenment, if final knowledge exists, then a fully awakened Buddha is one who has attained it. And if enlightenment doesn't exist, if final knowledge doesn't exist, then giving up trying to get it is enlightenment. But the way I've put it there, so it either exists or it doesn't exist. Well, those are the two views that the Buddha negated when he was teaching pratitya samutpada. Complete springing up by going back. So I think the truth, unfathomably, ungraspably, might exist as springing up together by going back. You might say by retreating away from those two false viewpoints. Shashvata drishti, enlightenment exists, it's an eternal thing. Ucheda drishti, nihilism. Pursuing enlightenment is a mug's game. There is no such thing as enlightenment. So those seem to be the two views. In the middle, the springing up, which is called samutpada, pratitya samutpada. Nāgārjuna's called it pratityotpattir in the previous verse. Springing up by going back. dependent springing up. That springing up, utpatihi, is impossible, na upapadyate, for a thing now being suppressed. Nirudhyamānasya bhāvasya. Okay, so if you want that springing up to be possible, then a thing being suppressed is not where it's at. Whether that thing is me being as a thing to be suppressed, or some part of me as a thing to be suppressed, that's not where it's at. We want to drop off the suppression of things. But to what is not now being suppressed, or what is beyond being suppressed, cānirudhyamānaha, that, sa, bhavaha, as a thing, nopapadyate, is impossible. So, but what is not now being suppressed cannot be a thing. What is beyond being suppressed cannot be a thing. So, like the Buddha wasn't suppressed, the Buddha was not a living thing. His life was an empty happening. And what springs up, as we've already explored in previous verses, springing up is an empty happening. It's not a thing moving. It's not a thing being realized. It's an empty happening. Nirudhyamānasyotpattir bhāvasyopapadyate cānirudhyamānas bhāvo nopapadyate. Springing up is impossible for a thing, for a being, for a living thing, for a living being, now being suppressed. But what is not now being suppressed, what is beyond being suppressed, cannot be a thing.
nirudhyamānasyotpattir bhāvasyopapadyate cānirudhyamānas bhāvo nopapadyate.